Book 4, on Existence, Shitti Kanda. This section discusses the place of the individual's being, jiva, in the scheme of creation. Vasistha points out that the individual is none other than the ego sense, or I, known as amakara. This ego sense is a chief impediment to living with the knowledge of one's true self, Atman Shitti. It is because of the ego sense that human beings fail to recognize themselves as they really are and suffer misery. It is only when the identification with the ego sense is extinguished that a seeker attains realization of the Atman, the Supreme Soul. The body and the senses are inert. It is the Chidabhasha, the reflected light of the Atman, that gives life to the body and makes the sense perform their function. The objects perceived by the senses are not different from the Atman. The perceiver and the object perceived both originate from the Atman and therefore are identical. When a person gains firm comprehension of this truth, he or she realizes that nothing exists apart from one's own Atman or self. This Atman is then realized as both the origin of this universe and its enjoyer as well. When this knowledge becomes firm, a person is freed from the duality of happiness and sorrow. Chastity, constant practice, detachment are the means for attaining this knowledge, which in turn leads to a firm abidance in the self, the Atman Shitti. Chapter 1. Immaterial spirit cannot have a material seed to produce any material world. Vasistha said, "Attend now, Rama, to the subject of existence which follows that of production. This knowledge produces nirvana, or utter annihilation of the self or soul. Know that the world of phenomena that exists before you, and your knowledge of ego or self-existence, are only false conception of the formless non-existence or emptiness. You see tints of various colors painting the empty sky without any paint of their cause. This is only a conception of the mind without its visual perception, like the vision in a dream of one who is not in a state of sound sleep. It is like a city in the sky built and present in your mind, or like shivering apes warming themselves by red clay, thinking it to be fire red hot. It is pursuing an unreality. The world of phenomena is only a different aspect of Brahma, like that of a whirlpool in water, and like the unsubstantial sunlight appears as the real substance in the sky. It is like the baseless fabric of gold of the celestials on high, and like the air-built castles of Gandharvas in the midway sky. It is like a false sea in a mirage, appearing true at the time, and like the celestial utopian cities of imagination and empty air that are taken for truth. It is like romantic realms with their picturesque scenes and poets' imaginations, which are nowhere in nature. It seems to be solid and thick within, but is without any pith or solidity, like a thing in an empty dream. It is like the ethereal sphere, full of light all around, but hollow within. It is like the blue autumn sky with its light and flimsy clouds, without any rainwater. It is like an unsubstantial vacuum with the cerulean blue of solid sapphire, and like mansions and women appearing in dreams, fleeting as air and intangible to touch. It is like a flower garden and picture painted with blooming blossoms, and appearing as fragrant but without any fragrance. It is luminous to sight without the inherent heat of light, and resembles the orb of the sun or a flaming fire represented in a picture. It is like a domain of ideas, the language of the brain, an unreal reality or a seeming something. It is like a painting of a bed of lotus flowers without essence or fragrance. It is like the variegated sky painted with colors that it does not possess. It is an unsolid as empty air and as many colored as the rainbow, without any color of its own. All its various colorings of materiality fade away under the right discrimination of reason, and in the end it is found to be as unsolid a substance as the stem of a plantain tree. It is like the rotation of black spots before the eyes of a blind man, and like the shape of a shadowy non-existence presented as something existent before the naked eye. Like a bubble of water, the world seems like something substantial to sight, but in reality all hollow within, and though appearing as juicy, it is without any moisture at all. Bubbling whirls are as widespread in the morning dews or frost, but take them up and you will find them to be nothing. Some think it is gross matter, others a vacuum. Some believe it is a fluctuation of thought or a false vision. Many believe it to be mere compounds of atoms. I am partly of a material frame, my body and mind, but spiritually I am an empty immaterial substance. Although I can be felt by the touch of the hand, yet I am as intangible as a nocturnal fiend, an empty shadow only." Rama said, "Sage, it is said that at the end of a great Kalpa age the visible world remains in its seed, after which it develops again in its present form. Please fully explain this to me. Are they ignorant or knowing men who think in these ways? Please, Sage, tell me the truth to answer my questions and tell me about the process of development." Vasistha replied, Those who say that the physical world existed in the form of a seed at the final sleep of Brahma are altogether ignorant of the truth and talk like children to children. Hear me tell you how contrary it is to right reason and how far removed from truth. It is a false supposition leading both the preacher and the hearer of such a doctrine to great error and an egregious mistake. Those who attempt to show the existence of the world in the form of a germ in a physical seed maintain a very silly position, as I shall now explain to you. A seed is in itself a visible thing. It is more an object of sense than that of mind. Like seeds of rice and barley are seen to sprout forth in their germs and leaves. The mind is beyond the 6 organs of sense in its very minute particle. It cannot possibly be born of itself, nor become the seed of the universe. The Supreme Spirit also, being more rarefied than the subtle ether and indefinable by words, cannot be of the form of a seed. That which is as minute as a nothing is equivalent to nothing. It could never be a physical seed, without which there could be no germ or sprout. That which is more rare and transparent than the empty and clear sky cannot possibly contain the world with all its mountains and seas, and the heavens with all their hosts in its transcendent substratum. There is nothing in any way like a substance in the substantiality of that being. If there is anything there, why is it not visible to us? There is nothing that comes of itself, and nothing material comes from immaterial spirit. Who can believe a hill proceeds from the hollowness of an earthen pot? How can a thing remain with another which is opposed to it in its nature? How can there be any shadow where there is light? And how does darkness reside in the disk of the sun, or even coldness in the fire? How can an atom contain a hill, or anything exist in nothing? The union of a similar with its dissimilar is as impossible as that of a shadow with the light of the sun. It is reasonable to suppose that the material seeds of the fig and rice should bring forth their shoots in time, but it is unreasonable to believe that a large material world be contained in an immaterial atom. We see the same organs of sense and their sensation in all men in every country, but there is no uniformity in men's understanding, nor can there be any reason assigned to this difference. Those who assign a certain cause to some event betray their ignorance of the true cause. What produces the effect except the very thing by some of its accessory powers? Throw away the doctrine of cause and effect invented by the ignorant. Know the truth that there is no beginning or end, and it appears as the world. Chapter 2. There is no material explanation for the world. It exists only in divine consciousness. Vasistha said, "Now Rama, who best knows the knowable, in order to dispel your belief in any separate existence of the world, all false fabrications of men, I will explain that there is only one pure and empty principle of consciousness. If we assume there was the germ of the world in the beginning, it still leaves the question, what were the accompanying causes of its development? Without cooperation of the necessary causes, there can be no vegetation of the seed, as no barren woman is ever known to bring forth an offspring in spite of the seed contained in her womb. If it was possible for a seed to grow without the aid of an accompanying cause, then it is useless to believe in the primary cause when it is possessed of such power in its own nature. It is Brahma himself who abides in his self in the form of creation at the beginning of the world. This creation is as formless as the Creator himself, and there is no relation of cause and effect between them. It is wrong to say that the earth and other elements are the accompanying causes of production, because it is impossible for these elements to exist prior to their creation. To say the world remained quiescent in its own nature, together with the accompanying causes, is like talk proceeding from the mouth of children and not of the wise. Therefore, Rama, there neither is or was or ever will be a separate world in existence. It is the one intelligence of the divinity that displays the creation in itself. So, Rama, there being an absolute absence of this visible world, it is certain that Brahma himself is all throughout endless space. The knowledge of the visible world is destroyed by destruction of all its causalities, but the causes continuing in the mind will cause phenomena to appear to the view even after their outward extinction. Elimination of phenomena can only result from the elimination of its causes, but if they are not suppressed in the mind, how can you eliminate the sight of phenomena? There is no other means of destroying our false conception of the world except by total elimination of phenomena from our view. It is certain that the appearance of the visible world is no more than our inner conception in the emptiness of consciousness. The knowledge of I, you, and he are false impressions of our minds like figures in painting. Mounds and hills, lands and sea, revolutions of day and night, months and years, the knowledge that this is a kalpa age, and this is a minute in movement, and this is life and this is death, are all mere conceptions of the mind. Knowledge of the duration and termination of a kalpa and great kalpa, and that of creation and beginning and end, are mere misconceptions of our mind. It is the mind that conceives millions of kalpas and billions of worlds, most of which are gone by and many are yet to come. The 14 regions of the planetary spheres and all the divisions of time and place are contained in the infinite space of supreme consciousness. The universe continues and displays itself serenely in the divine mind, as it did from before and throughout all eternity. It shines with particles of light of that consciousness as the sky is full with the radiance of sunlight. The inexpressible light thrown into the mind by divine consciousness shows itself as creation, which in reality is a baseless fabric by itself. It does not come into existence or dissolve into nothing. It neither appears nor sets at any time, but resembles a crystal glass with certain marks in it which can never be effaced. Creation displays of themselves in the clear intellect of God, as the variegated skies form portions of the indivisible space of endless vacuum. There are only properties of divine consciousness, as fluidity is that of water, motion of the wind, eddies of the sea, and qualities of all things. This creation is only a compact body of divine wisdom, and it is contained in divinity as its component part. Its rising and setting and continuance are exhibited alike in the tranquil soul. The world is empty owing to its lack of any accompanying secondary cause. It is self-born, and to call it born or produced is to breathe the breath of a madman. Rama, purify your mind from the impurity of false representation, and rise from the bed of your doubts and desires. Drive away your protracted sleep of ignorance, and be free from the fears of death and disease with every one of your friends in this court. Chapter 3. The world is eternal. There can be no creation or dissolution. Rama said, but it is said that Brahma, the Lord of creation, springs up by his memory at the end of a kalpa, and stretches out the world from his memory of it in the beginning of creation. Vasistha answered, so it is said, O support of Raghu's race, that after the universal dissolution, the Lord of creatures rises by his predestination, and at the commencement of a new creation. It is by his will that the world is stretched out from his recollection, and is manifested like an ideal city in the presence of Brahma, the creative power. The Supreme Being can have no memory of the past at the beginning of a new creation, because he has no prior birth or death. Therefore, this tree in the sky of memory has no relation to Brahma. Rama asked, doesn't the memory of the past continue in Brahma at his recreation of the world, like the former memory of man upon being reborn? Or are all past memories effaced from the mind of men by the delirium of death in their past lives? Vasistha replied, all intelligent beings, including Brahma, and all others of the past age, who attain nirvana or extinction are, of course, absorbed in one Brahma. Now tell me, my good Rama, where do these past memories and those with memories live when they are wholly lost at the final liberation of those with memories? It is certain that all beings are liberated and become extinct in Brahma at the great dissolution. Therefore, without the persons who remember, there cannot be memories of anything. The memory of itself that lives impressed in the empty space of individual intellects is truly the reservoir of the perceptible and imperceptible world. This memory is eternally present before the sight of God as a reflection of his own consciousness. It shines with the brightness of his self-consciousness from time without beginning and end, and is identical with this world, which is therefore termed self-born. The spiritual body that is the attribute of God from time without beginning is the same as the manifestation of himself, Viraja, exhibited in the form of the world or the microcosm. But the world is said to be composed of atoms, which compose the land and the woods, the clouds and the firmament. But there are no atoms to form time and space, action and motion, or revolutions of days and nights. The atoms of matter that fill the world have other initial atoms of spirit, which are inherent in them, and cause them to appear in the form of mountains and the like. But these forms, seeming to be conglomerations of atomic particles, and showing themselves to be our vision as lighted objects, are in reality no substantial things. Thus there is no end of the real and unreal sight of things. The real presents itself to the view of the learned, and to the unreal to that of the unlearned. The cosmos appears as the immutable Brahma only to the intelligent, and as the mutable visible world to the unintelligent. As the bright world appears to roll about like eggs in their spheres, so there are multitudes of other orbs shining in every atom in the universe. We see pillars carved with figures upon figures upon figures. In the same way, the grand pillar of the universe is composed of systems under systems to no end. As sand on a rock is attached but separable to it, and the grains are countless in number, so the orbs of the three worlds are like dust particles in mountainous body of Brahma. It may be possible to count the particles of rays scattered in sunbeams, but it is impossible to number the atoms of light emanating from the great sun of Brahma. As the sun scatters at his light particles on the sparkling waters and sands of the sea, so does the intellect of God disperse the atoms of its light all over the emptiness of the universe. As the notion of emptiness fills the mind with the idea of the visible sky, so the thought of creation, which is identical to Brahma, gives us a notion of his intellectual sphere. To understand the creation as something different from Brahma separates man from him, but to take creation as synonymous with Brahma leads him to his joy. The enlightened soul, free from its knowledge of the physical seed, and knowing Brahma alone as the fullness filling the vacuum of intellect, knows the knowable in his inward understanding as being that same as what has proceeded from him. Chapter 4. The world exists in the mind. Vasistha said, "The overthrow of the battery of the physical senses supplies us with a bridge over the ocean of the world. There is no other act whereby we may cross over it. Acquaintance with the Scriptures, association with the good and the wise, and practice of the virtues are the means whereby a rational and self-controlled man may come to know the absolute negation of phenomena. I have told you, O handsome Rama, about the cause of the appearance and disappearance of creation, resembling the heaving and resting of the waves of the sea of the world. There is no need for a long discourse to tell you that the mind is the germ of the forest of acts, and this germ, being nipped in the beginning, prevents the growth of the trees and frustrates the doing of the acts which are its fruits. The mind is all. Therefore, by the healing of your heart and mind, you can cure all troubles and diseases you may occur in the world. The minds of men are always troubled with thoughts of the world and bodily actions, but these being deadened and defunct, we see neither the body nor the outer world. The negation of the outer world and the suppression of the inner thoughts, by practice of self-denial for a long period of time, serve to curb the demon of the mind. It is possible to heal the inner disease of the internal mind by administration of this best and only medicine of negation of the external world. It is because of its thought that the mind is subject to the errors of its birth and death, and being bound to or liberated from the body in this world. The mind deluded by its thought sees the world shining before it like a man in his delusion sees the imaginary city of the Gandharvas drawn before him in empty air. All these visible worlds exist in the mind where they seem to exist, like the fragrance in the air consists of the clusters of flowers containing the essence. The little particle of the mind contains the world, like a small grain of sesame contains the oil, like an attribute is contained in its subject, and a property abides in its substance. The world abides in the mind in the same manner as sunbeams abide in the sun in brightness and light and heat and fire. The mind is the reservoir of the world, as snow is the receptacle of coldness. It underlies all existence, as the sky is that of emptiness, and as velocity is inherent in wind. Therefore the mind is the same as the world, and the world is same as the mind, all owing to their intimate and inseparable connection with each other. The world is lost by the loss of the mind, but the mind is not lost by destruction of the world. Chapter 5. The story of Shukra, Bhargava. Shukra falls in love with a fairy nymph. Rama said, "Tell me, sage, who knows all truth and is best acquainted with all that is past and is to come, how does the form of the world exist so vividly in the mind? Please explain to me by some illustration how this world appears as a visible object to the inner mind." Vasistha replied, "The world truly is situated in the minds of men, just as it appeared in its firm and compact state to the 10 bodiless sons of Indu. It is situated in the same manner in the minds of men as the thought of King Lavana's transformation of himself to a tribal under the influence of sorcery. It is in the same manner as Bhargava believed he possessed all worldly gratification, because true bliss has much more relation to the mind than to earthly possession." Rama said, "Sage, how did the son of Bhrigu come to enjoy earthly pleasures when he had been longing for heavenly joy?" Vasistha replied, "Rama, listen to my narration of the history of Bhrigu and Kala, whereby you will know how he came to possess earthly enjoyment. There is a tableland of Mandara mountain that has rows of tamala trees with beautiful flowers under them. Here sage Bhrigu conducted his arduous tapas in olden times, and it was in this place that his high-minded and valiant son Shukra also came to perform his tapas. Shukra was handsome as the moon, radiant with his brilliant beams. He took his seat in that happy grove of Bhrigu for the purpose of his tapas. Having long sat in that grove under the shade of a rock, Shukra removed himself to the flowery beds and fair plains below. He wandered freely about the bowers of Mandara pleasure garden in his youthful sport, and became revered under the wise and ignorant men of the place. He wandered there at random, like Trisanku, between the earth and sky, sometimes playing about as a boy, and at others sitting in fixed meditation like his father. He remained without any anxiety in his solitude, as a king has subdued his enemy. Then he happened to see an Apsara fairy traversing in her aerial journey. He saw her with his eyes of Hari, Vishnu, fixed upon the Lakshmi, as the fairy skimmed over the watery plain, decorated with wreaths of mandara flowers, her tresses waving loosely with a playful air. Her trinkets jingled with her movements, and her fragrance perfumed the winds of the air. Her fairy forms were as beautiful as a vine, and her eyeballs rolled as a state of intoxication. The moonbeams of her body shed their ambrosial dews over the landscape, and bewitched the hard heart of the young devotee as he stared at the fairy form before him. She also, with her body shining like a fair full moon, and shaking like a wave of the sea, became enamored of Shukra as she looked at his face. Shukra then checked the impulse of his mind, which the god of love had raised after her, but losing all power over himself, he became absorbed in the thought of his beloved object. Chapter 6. Shukra imagines Indra's paradise. Vasistha said, henceforth Shukra with his closed eye continued to think of the nymph and indulge himself in his dreams of an imaginary kingdom. He thought that the nymph was passing through the air to the paradise of Indra, the god with 1,000 eyes. He imagined he was following her closely to the happy region of the celestial gods. He thought he saw the gods decorated with garlands of beautiful mandara blossoms on their head, hanging resplendent as liquid gold. He seemed to see the heavenly maidens with their eyes like blue lotuses, regaling the eyes of their spectators, and others with their eyes as beautiful as those antelopes, playing with their sweet smiles all about. He saw also the Marutas, gods of the wind, bearing the fragrance of the flowers, breathing their sweet scent on one another, and resembling the omnipresent Vishwarupa by their heavenly journey. He heard the sweet hum of bees, giddy with the perfume exuding from the trunk of Indra's elephant. He listened to the sweet strains sung by a heavenly choir. There were the swans and the storks, gabbling in lakes with lotuses of golden color in them. There were celestial gods lying in tree gardens beside the holy stream of the Milky Way, the heavenly Ganges. These were the gods Yama and Indra, and the sun and moon, and the gods of fire and the winds. And there were the regions of the world whose shining bodies shaded the luster of vivid fire. On one side was Aravata, the warlike elephant of Indra, with the scratches of demonic weapons on his face, and tusks glory with the blood of the defeated host of demons. Those who were transported from heaven to earth in the form of luminous stars were wandering in their aerial vehicles, blazing with golden beams of the shining sun. The gods were washed by showers falling from the peaks of Mount Meru, and the waves of the Ganges rolled on the scattered mandara flowers floating on them. The alleys of Indra's groves were tinged with saffron from heaps of mandara flower dust, and they were trodden by groups of Apsara ladies playing wantonly upon them. There were gentle breezes blowing among Parajita plants, bright as moonbeams in the sacred bowers, and blowing fragrant honey from the cups of Kunda and mandara blossoms. The pleasure gardens of Indra was crowded with heavenly maidens, smeared with the frosty dust of Kasara flowers, covering them like vines of the grove in their yellow robes. Here were heavenly nymphs dancing the gaiety of the tune of their lover's song. There were the heavenly musicians Narada and Tambura joining their vocal music in unison with the melody of the stringed instruments, lute and lyre. Heavenly men, and pious and virtuous, were seen to soar high in their heavenly cars, sitting there with decorations of various kinds. The amorous maidens of the gods were clinging around their god Indra like the tender vines of the garden twine above the trees. There were galunka fruit trees, studded with clusters of their ripening fruit resembling sapphires and rubies, and set like rows of ivory teeth. After all these sights, Shukra thought of making his obeisance to Indra, who was seated on a seat like another Brahma, the creator of the 3 worlds. Having thought so, Shukra bowed down to Indra in his own mind, as Indra was a second Bhrigu in heaven, that is, a second father. Indra received him with respect, and having lifted him up with his hand, made him sit by himself. Indra addressed him, saying, I am honored, Shukra, by your call. This heaven of mine is graced by your presence. May you live long to enjoy the pleasure of this place. Then Indra sat in his seat with a graceful face that shone with the light of the unspotted full moon. Shukra, sitting by Indra's side, was saluted by all the assembled gods of heaven. He continued to enjoy every joy there, having been received with a paternal affection by the Lord of gods and men. Chapter 7. Shukra imagines embracing the fairy nymph. Vasistha said, thus Shukra, being among the gods in the celestial city, forgot his former nature without passing through the pangs of death. Having halted a while by the side of Sachi's consort, Indra, he rose up to roam about the paradise, charmed with all its various beauties. He looked with rapture on the beauty of his own body and longed to see the lovely beauties of heavenly beings, just as a swan is eager to meet the lotuses of the lake. He saw his beloved one among them in the garden of Indra's paradise, her eyes like those of a young deer, and with a stature as delicate as that of a tender amra vine. She also saw the son of Brigu and lost her self-control. Thus he observed all her indications of amorous feelings. His whole body dissolved in affection for her, like a moonstone melting under moonbeams, and so did hers likewise in tenderness for him. He, like the moonstone, was soothed by her cooling beauty, beaming like moonlight in the sky. She also, being seen by him, was entirely subdued by her love to him. At night they bewailed like ruddy geese at their separation from one another, and at daybreak they were filled with delight on seeing each other. They were both as beautiful to behold as the sun and the opening blossoms of the lotus in the morning. Their presence added a charm to the garden of paradise, which promised to confer their desired bliss. She committed her subdued self to the mercy of Kama, the god of love, who in his turn darted his arrows relentlessly into her tender heart. Her body was covered with Kama's arrows, like a lotus blossom hidden under a swarm of bees. She became as disordered as the leaves of a lotus disturbed under a shower of raindrops. She fluttered at the gentle breath of playful winds, like the tender filaments of flowers. She moved as gracefully as a swan, her eyes as blue as the petals of blue lotuses. She was deranged by the god of love, like a bed of lotuses is disturbed by a mighty elephant. Her lover, Shukra, in his fancy, saw her in that plight. At last the shade of night spread over the landscape of heavenly paradise, as if the god of destruction, Shiva, was advancing to bury the world under universal gloom. A deep darkness spread over the face of the earth, and covered it with thick gloom, like the regions of the polar mountain, where the hot blazing sun is hidden by the dark shade of perpetual night, as if hiding his face in shame under the dark veil of gloom. When the assembled crowds at the place retired in different directions to their respective homes, the loving pair met together in the midst of the grove. Then the love-smitten lady approached her lover with sidelong glances. Like a bird on air alights from her aerial flight in the evening to meet with her mate on the earth below. She advanced towards the son of Brigu. As a peahen comes out to meet the rising cloud, she saw a whitewashed building, a couch placed inside. Bhargava, Shukra, entered the white hall like Vishnu entering the milk ocean, accompanied by his beloved Lakshmi, who held his hand with her downcast countenance. The Apsara fairy graced Shukra like the lotus stalk graces the bosom of the elephant. She spoke to him sweetly with words mixed with tender affection. She told him in a sweet and delightful speech filled with expression of endearment, "Behold, O my moon-faced lover, I see the curve of your bow is bent for my destruction. Kama is shooting his arrows to destroy this lovelorn maid. Therefore protect me from him. I am so helpless from his rage that I have come under your protection. Know, my good friend, that the duty of good people is to relieve the wretched from their distress. Those who do not look upon them with a compassionate eye are reckoned the basest of men. Love is never abused by those who are acquainted with erotica, because the true love of faithful lovers endures to the end without any fear of separation. Know, my dear, that the delightful drought of love defies the dewy beams distilled by the moon, and the sovereignty of the three worlds is never as pleasing to the soul as the love of the beloved. I derive the same bliss from the touch of your feet as lovers when they first love one another. I live by the nectar of your touch, as the camuda blooms imbibe ambrosial moonbeams at night. As the fluttering chikora is delighted drinking moonbeams, so this supplicant at your feet is blessed by the touch of the leaf-like palm of your hand. Embrace me now to your bosom filled with ambrosial bliss." Saying so, the maiden fell upon his bosom with her body soft as a flower and her eyes turning like a small leaf in a gentle breeze. The loving pair fell into their trance of love in that happy grove, like a couple of playful bees creep into the lotus cup under the fair filament of the flower shaking by the gentle breeze. Chapter 8. Reincarnation of Shukra. Vasistha related, "Thus the son of Brigu, in his daydream, believed himself to be enjoying heavenly pleasures. He thought of enjoying the company of his beloved, like the full moon accompanied by an evening star, bedecked with garlands of mandara flowers and inebriated with a drink of ambrosial draught. He roved about the ideal lake of heaven, filled with the golden lotuses and frequented by the giddy swans and gabbling geese of heaven. He roamed beside the bank of the celestial Mandakini river, accompanied by celestial singers. He drank sweet nectar juice, beaming like moonbeams in the company with the gods. He rested under trees and groves formed by the shaking branches of parijata plants. He amused himself with his favorite air spirits, swinging himself in hanging cradles formed by the shady vines of the arbor and screening him from the spring sunbeams. The flower beds of the Nandana gardens were trodden down under the feet of Shiva's followers, as when the ocean was churned by Mandara mountain. Tender weeds and willows growing like golden shrubs, and the tangled bushes by the beach of the river were trampled under the legs of heated elephants, as when they infest the lotus lakes of Mount Meru. Accompanied by his sweetheart, Shukra passed moonlit nights in the forest groves of Kailash, listening to the songs and music of heavenly singers. Roaming on the tablelands of Gandhamandana mountain, he decorated his beloved from head to foot with lotus garlands. He wandered with her to the polar mountain, which is full of wonders, having darkness on one side and light on the other. Here they played together with tender smiles and fond caresses and embraces. He thought he remained in a celestial abode beside the marshy land of Mandara for 60 years, and passed his time in the company of the young Aspara of the place. He believed he passed half a yuga with his companion on the border of the Milky Ocean, and they associated with the maritime people and islanders of that ocean. Next he thought to live in a garden of the city of celestial singers, Gandharvas, where he believed to have lived for an immeasurable period like the genius of time himself, who is the producer of an infinity of worlds. He again found himself by the celestial seat of Indra, where he believed to have resided with the mistress for many cycles of the 4 yuga ages. It was the end of the merit of these acts that they were doomed to return to earth, shorn of their heavenly beauty and fine features. Being deprived of his heavenly seat and vehicle, and bereft of his godlike form and feature, Shukra was overcome by deep sorrow, like a hero falling in the field of warfare. His great grief at his fall from heaven to earth broke his frame as if into 100 fragments, like a waterfall falling on a stony ground and breaking into 100 streams below. With the emaciated bodies and sad minds, they wandered about in the air like birds without their nest. Afterwards, their disembodied minds entered into the network of lunar beams. Then in the form of molten frost or rainwater, they grew as vegetables on earth. Some of these vegetables were prepared and eaten by Brahman in the land of Dasarna, the confluence of 10 streams. The substance of Shukra changed to the semen of the Brahman, and then conceived as a son by his wife. The boy was trained in the society of ancient sages, Munis, to the practice of rigorous austerities, and he dwelt in the forest of Meru for the whole Manvatara, observing his holy rites. There he gave birth to a male child of human figure in a doe, to which his mistress was transformed in her next birth, and became exceedingly fond of the boy to the neglect of his sacred duties. He constantly prayed for long life, wealth, and learning of his darling, and thus forsook the constancies of faith and reliance in providence. Thus his falling off from the thought of heaven to those of earthly success of his son made his shortened life an easy prey to death, just as the inhaling of air by the serpent. His worldly thoughts weakened his understanding and caused him to be reborn as the son and successor to the king of Madras. Having long reigned in this kingdom of Madras by eliminating all his enemies, he was overtaken at last by old age, as a lotus flower stunted by frost. The king of Madras was released on his royal body by his desire for asceticism, whereby he became the son of a hermit in the following birth in order to perform his austerities. He retired to a bank on the meandering Ganges River, and there, being devoid of all his worldly anxieties and cares, absorbed himself in tapas. Thus the son of Brigu, having passed in various forms in his successive birth according to the desire of his heart, remained at last like a fixed tree on the bank of a running stream. Chapter 9. Description of Shukra's body during his austerities. Vasistha related, as Shukra was indulging his reveries in this manner, he passed insensibly under the flight of a series of years which glided over him in the presence of his father. At last his body withered away with age under the inclement sun, wind, and rain. It fell down on the ground like a tree torn from its roots. In all his former birth his mind thirsted after fresh pleasures and enjoyment, just like a deer hunts from forest to forest after fresh vegetation. He underwent repeated birth and death in his wandering in the world in search of its enjoyment. He seemed like something whirled about in a mill or a turning wheel, until at last he found his rest in the cooling beach of the rivulet. Now the disembodied spirit of Shukra remained to reflect on his past incarnation in all the real and ideal forms of his imagination. It thought of its former body on Mandara mountain, and how it was reduced to a skeleton of mere bones and skin by the heat of the sun and his austerities. It remembered how the wind instrument of its lung breathed out the joyous music of its exemption from the pain of action. Seeing how the mind is plunged into the pit of worldly cares, the body seems to laugh at it by showing the white teeth of the mouth in derision. The cavity of the mouth, the sockets of the eyes, the nostrils and the ear holes in the open face are all expressive of the hollowness of human and heavenly bodies. The body sheds a tear of its eyes in sorrow for its past pains and austerities, just like the sky rains after excessive heat to cool the earth. The body is refreshed by breeze and moonbeams, just as woodlands are renovated by cooling showers in the rainy season. It remembered how its body was washed on the banks of mountain streams by waterfalls from above, and how it was daubed by the flying dust and dirt of sin. It was as naked as a withered tree, and rustled to the air with the breeze, yet it withstood the keen blast of winter like unshaken devotion in a person. The faded face, the withered lungs and arteries, and the skinny belly resemble those of the goddess of famine who cried aloud in the forest and the howling of wild beasts. Yet the holy person of the hermit, owing to its freedom from passion and feeling its fervent tapas, was unhurt by envious animals, and was not devoured by rapacious beasts and birds. The body of Brigu's son was weakened by its abstinence and self-denial, and his mind was employed in holy tapas, as his body lay prostrate on the bed of stones. Chapter 10. Brigu's anger evokes Yama, who describes Shuka's many lives. Vasistha continued, After the lapse of 1,000 years, the great Brigu suspended his holy meditation, disengaged his mind from its meditation on God, and rose from his holy trance. He did not find his son lowly bending down his head before him, the son who was the leader of the army of virtues, and who was the personified figure of all merits. He saw only his son's body lying like a skeleton before him, like wretchedness or poverty personified in that shape. The skin of his body was dried by the sun, and his nostrils snored like a whooping bird. The entrails of his belly sounded like a dry leather pipe with the croaking of frogs. His eye sockets were filled with newborn worms, and his rib bones had become like bars of a cage, with a thin skin over them resembling a spider's web. The dry and white skeleton of the body resembled the desire of fruition, which bends it to the earth to undergo all the favorable and unfavorable accidents of life. The crown of the head had become as white and smooth as a Shiva linga anointed with camphor at an Hindu Varchit ceremony in honor of the moon. The withered head erected on a bony neck bone was like the soul supported by the body. The nose had shriveled into a dry stalk for lack of flesh, and the nose bone stood like a post dividing two halves of the face. The face, standing erect over the shoulders of both sides, was looking forward towards the womb of an empty sky, where its vital breath had fled from the body. The two legs, thighs, knees, and arms had doubled in length, and lay slackened with fatigue of a long journey. The shriveled flesh and skin of the belly, lean like a thin strip of wood, showed the emptiness inside of the ignorant. Seeing the withered skeleton of his son lying like a worn-out post, Brigu reflected and rose from his seat. At the sight of the dead body, he began to question in his mind whether it could be the lifeless carcass of his son or any other. Thinking it to be the dead body of his son, he became angry at the god of death. He prepared to pronounce his curse on the god of fate as vengeance for snatching his son so prematurely from him. At this, Yama, the lord of death and devourer of living beings, assumed his figurative form of a material body and appeared in an instant before the enraged father. He appeared in armor with 6 arms, and as many faces, accompanied by an army of his adherents, and holding noose, sword, and other weapons in his hand. The rays of light radiating from his body gave it the appearance of a hill filled with heaps of crimson Kansuka flowers growing in mountain forest. Rays of living fire flashing from his trident gave it the glare of golden ringlets fastened to the ears on all sides of the sky. The breath of his host hurled down mountain ridges, hanging about them like swinging cradles. His dark sword flashed with somber light and darkened the disk of the sun, as if by the smoke of the final conflagration of the earth. Having appeared before the great sage who was enraged at the raging sea, he soothed him to calmness as after a storm by the gentle breath of his speech. Yama speaking, The sages are acquainted with the laws of nature, and know that past and future is present before them. They are never moved with a motive for anything, and they are far from being moved without a cause. Your sages observe the many rules of religious austerities, and we observe the endless and immutable law of destiny. We honor you for your holiness and not from any other desire. Do not defame your righteousness by your rage, nor think to do us any harm. We are spared unhurt by the flames of final disillusion, and we cannot be consumed by your curses. We have destroyed the spheres of the universe and devoured legions of Shivas, millions of Brahmas, and multitudes of Vishnus. Therefore, what is there that we cannot do? We are appointed as devourers of all beings, and you are destined to be devoured by us. This is ordained by destiny herself, and not by any act of our own will. It is the nature of flame to ascend upwards, and that of fluids to flow downward. It is destined for food to be eaten by its eater, and that creation must be destroyed by us. Know this form of mind to be that of the Supreme Being, whose universal spirit acts in various forms all over the universe. To the unstained sight, there is no other agent or object here except the Supreme, although the stained sight sees many agents and objects. Agency and objectivity are terms coined only by the short-sighted. They disappear before the expanded views of the wise. As flowers grow on trees, so are animals born on earth. Their growth and birth, and also their fall and death, are of their own spontaneity and mistakenly called their causation. As the motion of the moon is caused by no causal cause, though they unwisely falsely attribute a causality to it, such also is the course of death in the world its own spontaneous nature. The mind is falsely said to be the agent of all its enjoyment in life, though it is no agent of itself. It is a mistaken belief, like the false conception of a serpent in the rope where there is no serpent at all. Therefore, O sage, do not allow yourself to be so angry for your sorrow, but consider the course of events that befall humankind in its true light. We are not moved to any act by desire or fame or influenced by pride or passion. We ourselves are subject to destiny, which predominates over all actions. Knowing that the course of our conduct is subject to destiny appointed by divine will, the wise never allow themselves to be subject to darkness of pride or passion at our doing. That we must do only our duty at all times is the rule laid down by the wise Creator. You cannot attempt to remove it by subjecting yourself to ignorance and idleness. Where is the enlightened sight, that gravity and that patience of yours, that you grovel in this manner in the dark like the blind, and slide from the brood and beaten path laid open for everyone? Why don't you consider your cause as a sequence of your own act? Why do you, who are a wise man, falsely accuse me like the ignorant? You know that all living beings have two bodies here, of which one is known as the intellectual or spiritual mind or mind. The other is the inert or physical frame that is fragile and perishable. The minute thing of the mind lasts until its liberation, and is what leads all to their good or evil desires. As a skillful charioteer guides his chariot with care, so this body is conducted by the intelligent mind with equal attention and fondness. But an ignorant mind that is prone to evil destroys a good body, just like little children break their dolls of clay in sport. The mind is called the ruler of the body, Purusha, and at the working of the mind is taken for the act of man. It is bound to the earth by its desire and freed by its freedom from earthly attractions and expectation. The mind is that which thinks in itself. This is my body here, and these are the members of my body, and this is my head. The mind is called life because it has a living principle in it. The mind is one and the same and identical with understanding. It becomes the individual ego by its consciousness, and so the same mind passes under various designations according to its different functions. It called heart because of the body's affection, and so it takes many other names at will. But all earthly bodies are perishable. When the mind receives the light of truth, it is called enlightened intellect, which being free from a thought relating to the body is set to its supreme joy. Thus, as you sat absorbed in meditation, the mind of your son wandered from your presence to regions far and wide in the ways of its various desires. Having left this body behind him in the mountain cave of Mandara, he fled to the celestial region, like a bird flies from his nest to the open air. This mind got into the city of the guardian gods and remained in a part of Nandana garden in the happy groves of Mandara under a dwelling of Parajita flowers. There he thought he passed a revolution of 8 cycles of the 4 yugas in company with Vishwachi, a beautiful Apsara maiden. He clung to her like a 6-footed bee clings to a blooming lotus, but as a strong desire led him to the happy regions of his imagination, so he had his fall from them at the end of what he had earned, like nightly dew falling from heaven. He faded away in his body and all his limbs, like a flower attached to an ear or head ornament. He fell down together with his beloved one, like ripened fruit from trees. Being deprived of his aerial and celestial body, he passed through the atmospheric air and was born again on earth in a human figure. He became a Brahman in the land of Dasarna, then a king of the city of Kosala. He became a hunter in a great forest, then a swan on the banks of the Ganges. He became a king of the solar race, then a king of the Pundras, and afterwards a missionary among the Sauras and Salwas. Next he became a demigod, and finally the son of an ancient sage. He became a ruler in Madras, then the son of a devotee bearing the name of Vasudeva and living on the banks of Samanga. Your son also has passed many other births to which he was led to by desire. He also had undergo some birth in lower animals. He repeatedly has been a hunter, Karata, in the Vindhya hills and at Katava. He was a chieftain in Savera and became an ass at Trigarta. He grew as a bamboo tree in the land of Keralas and as a deer in the outskirts of China. He became a serpent on a palm tree and a cock on a tamala tree. This son of yours had been skilled in mantras, and he practiced them in the land of Vidyaharas. Then he became a Vidyahara magician himself, and worked his jugglery on taking ornaments from women. He became a favorite of females, just as the sun is dear to lotus flowers. Being as handsome as Kama, the god of love, he became a favorite among Vidyahara ladies in the land of Gandharvas. At the end of the Kalpa age of universal destruction, he saw the 12 sons of the zodiac shining at once before him. He was reduced to ashes by their heat, just as a grasshopper is burnt by falling on fire. Finding no other world or body where he could enter, his spirit roved about in empty air like a bird soars on high without a nest. After the lapse of a long time, Brahma again awoke from his long night of repose and again commenced his creation of the world in all its various forms. The wandering spirit of your son was led by its desire, as if propelled by a gust of wind, to become a Brahman again and be reborn on this earth. He was born under the name of Vasudeva, as a son of a Brahman. He was taught all the Shruti scriptures among the intelligent and learned men of the place. In this Kalpa age he became a Vidyahara again, and committed himself to the performance of his tapas on the bank of Samanga, where he is still sitting in his yoga meditation. Thus his desire for the varieties of worldly appearance led him to various birth in the woods and forests in the womb of the earth, covered with the jungles of the thorny Kadira, Karanja, and other bushes and brambles. Chapter 11. Yama, time on the mind as the cause producing the world. Yama, time continued. Your son is still engaged in his rigorous austerities on the bank of Samanga River, rolling with its loud waves on the beach and the winds blowing and howling from all sides. He has been sitting still in his firm tapas with matted braids of hair in his head and beads of Rudraka seeds in his hand, and controlling the members of his body from going astray. O venerable sage, if you wish to know the dreams in his mind, you shall have to open your intellectual eye in order to pry into the thoughts of others. Vasistha said, saying so, Yama, the Lord of the world, who sees at all one view, made the Muni dive with his intellectual eye into the thoughts of his son. By his perception, the sage immediately saw all the incident in the sequence of birth in his son's mind, as if they were reflected in the mirror of his own mind. Having seen the mind of his son in his own mind, the Muni returned from the bank of Samanga to his own body at Mount Mandara, where it was left in its sitting posture in the presence of Yama. Surprised at what he saw, the sage looked upon Yama with a smile. Dispassionate as he was, he spoke to the god in the following soft and dispassionate words. Brigu speaking. O God, who is Lord of past and future, we are only ignorant children before you, whose brilliant insight sees at once the 3 times of past, present, and future. The knowledge of the existence of the world by its varying forms and fluctuations, whether it is a real entity or not, is the source of all error of the wisest of men. It is you, O powerful God, who knows what is inside this world, while to us it presents its outward figure only in the shape of a magic scene. I knew very well that my son is not subject to death, therefore I was struck with wonder to see him lying like a dead body. Thinking that the imperishable soul of my son was snatched by death, I was led to the brainless desire of cursing you on his untimely death. For though we know the course of things in the world, yet we are subject to impulse of joy and grief owing to prosperity and adversity. Moreover, to be angry with wrongdoers and to be pleased with those that act rightly have become the general rule in the course of the world. As we are subject to the error of the reality of the world, we labor under the sense of what is our duty and what we must refrain from. But deliverance from this error removes all such responsibilities from us. When we fret at death without understanding its intention, we are to be blamed, of course. You have made me acquainted with the thoughts of my son. I can see the whole scene on the bank of Samanga River. Of the 2 bodies of men, the mind alone is omnipresent. The leader of the outer body of animated being, the mind therefore is a true body that reflects and makes us conscious of the existence of ourselves as also of the exterior world. Rama replied, You have rightly said, O Brahman, that the mind is the true body of man. It is the mind that molds the body according to its will, just as the potter makes a pot at his pleasure. The mind frames a form and gives a feature to the person that it did not have before, and it destroys one in existence in a moment. Imagination gives an image to an airy nothing, like children sees ghosts before them in the dark. It is well known to everyone that the mind's power creates apparent realities out of absolute unreality. In dream and delirium, its misconception and fallacies and all kinds of error, like the sight of magic cities and talismans. It is from their reliance on visual sight that men consider the material body to be the principal body, and they conceive the mind as a secondary or supplementary part. It was the divine mind that formed the world from its thought. Therefore, the world of phenomena is neither a substance by itself, nor is it a nothing. The mind is part of the body and spreads itself into many forms through its thoughts and desires. Like the branch of a tree shoots forth and blossoms and leaves, as we see two moons by optical deception, so one mind appears as many in many individuals. The variety of the mind's desire makes it perceive and produce varieties of things, like pots and pictures and the like. The same mind thinks itself as many by the diversity of its thoughts, such as I am weak, I am poor, I am ignorant, and the like. The thought, I am none of the fancied forms which I feign to myself, but of that form from where I am, causes the mind to be one with the everlasting Brahman by divesting it of the thoughts of all other things. All things springing from Brahma sink at last in him. Like the huge waves of the wide and billowy ocean rise only to subside in its calm and undisturbed waters below. They sink in the Supreme Spirit, resembling one vast body of pure, transparent, cold and sweet water, and like a vast mine of brilliant gems of unfailing brightness. One thinking himself to be a little wave diminishes his soul to littleness, but one believing himself to be a large wave enlarges his spirit to greatness. He who thinks of himself as a little being fallen from above to suffer in another world is born upon earth in the form he took for his pattern. But he who thinks himself to be born to greatness soon rises by his energy and becomes as big as a hill and shines with the lustre of rich gems growing upon it. He rests in peace who thinks himself to be in the cooling orb of the moon, otherwise the body is consumed with care, like a tree on the bank is burnt down by fire. Others, like forest trees, are fixed and silent and shudder for fear of being burnt down by the wildfire of the world, though they are situated at ease, such as beside the running streams of limpid water, and as high as on mountain tops of inaccessible height. Those who think they are surrounded by worldly affairs are like wide-stretching trees awaiting their fall by impending blasts of wind. Those who wail aloud for being broken to pieces under the pressure of their misery are like the noisy waves of sea breaking against the shore and shedding their tears in the form of watery spray. But the waves are not of one kind, nor are they altogether entities or nullis in nature. They are neither small or large, nor high or low, nor do these qualities abide in them. Waves do not abide in the sea, nor are they without the sea, or the sea without them. They are of the nature of desire in the soul, rising and setting at their own accord. The dead are undying, and the living are not living. Thus is the law of their mutual succession, which nothing can prevent or alter. As water is universally the same and transparent in its nature, so the all-pervading Spirit of God is pure and holy in every place. This one and the same Spirit is the body of God, and is called the transparent Brahman. It is omnipotent and everlasting, and constitutes the whole world appearing as distinct from us. The many wonderful powers that it contains are all active in their various ways. The different powers produce different ends and are all contained in that same body. All the natural and material forces have the divine spirit for their focus. Brahma was produced in Brahman, just as the wave is produced in water. Male and female are produced from the neuter Brahman, changed and forming both of them. That which is called the world is only an attribute of Brahma. There is not the slightest difference between Brahma and the world. Truly, this plenitude is Brahma, and the world is nothing other than Brahma himself. Think intently upon this truth, and shun all other false beliefs. There is one eternal law that presides over all things, and this one law branches forth into many, bringing forth 100 varieties of effects. The world is a collection of laws that are only manifestations of the almighty power and omniscience. Both the inert and active proceed from the same, and the mind proceeds from the consciousness, chit, of God. Various desires evolve by the power of men from their exact prototypes in the Supreme Soul. Therefore it is Brahma that manifests itself in the visible world and is full with various forms, like the sea with all its waves and surges. It assumes to itself all varieties of form by its volition of evolution, or the will of becoming many. It is spirit that displays itself in itself and by itself, like seawater displays its waves in its own water and by itself. As the various waves are nothing other than seawater, so all these phenomena are not different from the essence of the Lord of the world. As the same seed develops itself in the various forms of branches and buds, twigs and leaves, and fruits and flowers, so the same almighty seed evolves itself in the multitude of varieties of creation. As strong sunlight displays itself in variegated colors in different bodies, so does omnipotence display itself in various vivid colors, all of which are unreal shades. As the bosom of a colorless cloud receives the variety of transient colors displayed in the rainbow, so the inscrutable Spirit of the Almighty reflects and refracts the various colors displayed in creation. Inert matter and inactivity proceed from the active agent without a secondary cause. Like the active spider produces the passive thread, and the living man brings his dull torpor and sleep upon himself. Again, the Lord makes the mind produce matter only for its own bondage, just like he makes the silkworm weave its own cocoon for its own confinement. The mind of its own will forgets its spiritual nature, and makes a strong prison house for itself, like the silkworm weaves its own coating. But when the mind, by its own free will, inclines to think of its spiritual nature, it gets its release from the prison house of the body and bondage in the world, just like a bird or beast is released from its cage, or a big elephant let loose from its chains and the tying post. The mind gradually molds itself into the form which it constantly thinks upon itself. The mind derives from within itself the power to be what it wishes to become. The long-sought power, when acquired, becomes as familiar to the soul as the dark clouds that attend the sky in the rainy season. The newly obtained power is assimilated with its recipient, just like the vine of every season is manifested in its effect upon the trees. There is no bondage or liberation of human soul, or of the divine spirit. We cannot account for the use of these words among mankind. There is no liberation or bondage of the soul which is the same with the divine. It is this delusive world that shows the immortal soul under the veil of mortality, or as eclipsed by and under the shadow of temporary affairs. The unsteady mind has wrapped the steady soul under the sheath of error, just like the silkworm's cocoon covers the dormant worm. All bondages that bind the embodied soul to earth are the works of the mind, which is the root of all worldly ties and affections. All human affections and attachments to the visible world are born and remain in the mind, although they are as distinct from it as the waves of the ocean or moonbeams are produced from and contained in their receptacles. The Supreme Spirit is stretched out like one universal ocean, agitated into myriads of waves and billows. Consciousness itself is spread out like the water of the universal ocean, containing everything that is watery and earthly in its infinite bosom. All those who appear as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and also those who have become gods and those who are called men and male creatures, are all like the waves of the sea raised spontaneously by the underlying spirit. So are Yama, Indra, the sun, fire, Kubera, and the other gods. So too are the Gandharvas, Kinnaras, Vindhyaharas, and other gods and demigods who rise and fall or remain for a while like the waves of the sea. They rise and fall as waves on every side, though some continue for a longer duration, like the lotus-born Brahma and others. Some are born to die in the moment like petty gods and men. Others are dead almost as soon as they are born, such as insects and some worms. Worms and insects, gnats and flies, serpents and huge snakes rise in the great ocean of the divine spirit like drops of water scattered about by waves of the sea. They are other moving animals like men and deer and vultures and jackals that are produced on land and mountains, in woods and forests, and in marshy ground. Some are long-lived, and others live for a short time. Some live with higher aims and ambitions, and others with no other care than self-preservation and their contemptible bodies. Some think of their stability in this world of dreams, and others are betrayed by their false hope of the stability of worldly affairs, which are quite unstable. Some subject to penury and poverty have little to effect in their lives. They always torment themselves with thoughts that they are poor, miserable, weak, and ignorant. Some are born as trees, and others have become like gods and demigods. Some are furnished with moving bodies. Others are dissolved like water in the sea. Some are no less durable than many kalpas, and others return to the Supreme Spirit by the moonlike purity of their souls. All things have risen from the ocean-like spirit of Brahman, like its moving undulation. The mind is everyone's intellectual consciousness. Chapter 12. Yama on the mistake of individual consciousness, different levels of awareness. Yama said, "The consciousness of gods, demigods, and men as distinct beings is quite wrong because they are in no way distinct from the infinite ocean of divine spirit, of which they are all like undulations. Our false conceptions make us distinguish between ourselves and the Supreme Self. The thoughts of being separate and apart from the Supreme Spirit is the cause of our degradation from our pristine holiness and image of God, in which man was made at first and was infused with his Holy Spirit. Remaining within the depth of the Divine Spirit, yet thinking ourselves to live without it, is the cause of keeping us in darkness on the surface of the earth. Our consciousness of ourselves as Brahma, being spoiled by the various thoughts in our minds, becomes the root of our activities, while the pure consciousness of I Am is free from all action and energies. The inner desire of the heart and mind becomes the seed of earthly actions, which sprouts forth in thorny plants like the karanja, a handful of which fills the ground with thick weeds. Living bodies lie scattered like pebbles on earth, rolling about or lying down with their temporary joy and grief in continued succession, owing to their ignorance of themselves. From the highest heaven of Brahma down to the lowest deep, there is a constant undulation of the Divine Spirit, like the vibration of the wind which keeps all being in their successive wailing and rejoicing, and in their constant birth and death. There are some of the pure and enlightened souls, like the gods Hari Vishnu, Hari Shiva, and others. Some are of somewhat darkened understanding, such as men and the inferior demigods. Some are placed in greater darkness, like worms and insects. Others are situated in utter darkness, like trees and vegetables. Some grow far away from the great ocean of the Divine Spirit, like the grass and weeds of the earth that are ever degraded, owing to their being the emblems of sin. Others, like dull stones and heinous snakes, are barred from elevation. Some have come to being only with their bodies, and they do not know that death, like a mouse burying a house, has been undermining the fabric of their bodies. Some have gone through the ocean of divine knowledge and become like gods in their living bodies, like Brahma, Hari, and Hara. Some, having little understanding, have gone down the depth of holy knowledge without ever reaching the bottom or finding its other shore. Some beings have undergone many births, and having more yet to pass through, remain abortive and unenlightened without the light of truth. Some are tossed up and down like fruit flung from the hand. These flying upwards have gone higher still, and those going down have fallen still lower and lower. It is forgetfulness of supreme joy that causes one to wander in various births of happiness or sorrow. Knowledge of the Supreme causes the cessation of reincarnation, just like the memory of Garuda destroys the power of the most destructive poison. Chapter 13. Yama explains to Brigu how thoughts create. They go to Shukra. Yama said, "Among these various species of living creatures, which resemble the waves of the ocean, and are as numerous as the plants and vines of spring, there are among the Yakshas, Gandharvas, and Kinnaras who have overcome the errors of their mind, and have well considered everything before and after them, and who have become perfect in their lives, passing as the living liberated persons in this world. There are others among the moving and unmoving, who are as unconscious of themselves as wood or stone. Many are worn out with air, and are incapable of judging for themselves. But those awakened to sense have the rich mind of the Scriptures, framed by the enlightened to guide their souls. Those awakened to sense, and whose sins are washed off, have their understanding purified by the light of the Scripture. The study of good work destroys the error of the mind, just as the course of the sun in the sky destroys the darkness of the night. Those who have not succeeded to dispel the errors of their minds have darkened their understanding by a mist of ignorance, like the frosty sky of winter, and they find the phantoms of their error dancing like demons before their eyes. All living bodies are subject to pain and pleasure, but it is the mind which constitutes the body, and not the flesh. The body that is seen to be composed of the 5 elements to make flesh and bones is a creation of the imagination of the mind. It has no substantiality. What your son had thought of in his mental body he found in that same body. He was not accountable to anyone for anything or whatever passed in his mind. Whatever acts a man wills to do in his own mind, the same comes to take place in a short time. There is no other agency of anyone else required to bring them about. Whatever the mind did in a moment and of its own accord, moved by its own will or desire, there is nobody in the world who has the power to do or undo at any time. The suffering of the torments of hell, the enjoyment of heavenly bliss, and the thoughts of birth and death are all fabrications of the mind that labor under these thoughts. What need I to tell more in the manner of writers of many words on this subject, other than go to the place where your son is situated? Shukra, having tasted the pleasure and pain of all these states at a moment's thought of his mind, is now seated in penance or topless on the bank of the Samgara river under spreading moonbeams. His vital breath, having fled from his heart, became like a moonbeam sparkling in a dewdrop, and entered the uterus in the form of a virile semen. Vasistha speaking. Saying so, the Lord of Death smiled to think of the course of nature, and taking hold of Brigu's hand in his own, they departed together like the sun and the moon. "Oh, wonderful is the law of nature," said Brigu slowly to himself, and then rose higher and higher as the sun ascends above his rising mountain. With their luminous bodies they arrived at the spot of the Samanga River and shone on high above the tamala trees below. Their simultaneous rising in the clear sky made them appear like the sun rising with a full moon over a cloudy horizon. Valmiki said, as the Muni Vasistha was describing these things, the sun went down his setting mountain, and the day departed to its evening service. The court broke with mutual salutation to perform their evening rites and observances, after which they joined the assembly at the dawn of the next day. Chapter 14. Yama and Brigu awakened Shukra from his tapas. He remembers his past lives. Vasistha said, Yama and Brigu departed from the cave of Mandara mountain and traveled towards the bank of Samanga river. As he descended from the mountain, he saw a great light below proceeding from the bodies of the celestials sleeping in the tree groves of the golden vine. Birds were playing in sprays formed by cradling vines under the canopy of heaven. Lovely antelopes looked face to face, their eyes resembling blue lotuses. They saw spiritual masters sitting on their stony seats upon elevated rocks, their bodies full of vigor and their eyes looking on the spheres with defiance. They saw the lords of the elephant herd, their big trunks as large as palm trees, plunging in lakes covered with flowers, falling constantly from the branch of flowering trees on the shore. They saw mountain bulls dozing in their giddiness and sitting as if intoxicated, while their bodies were reddened by the red dust of flowers and their tails flushed with the crimson dust blown by the breeze. There were deer whose tails served as fans for the mountain king, immersed in pools filled with falling flowers. They saw Kanara lads sitting on the tops of straight and stately date trees, playing with pelting each other with the date fruit that stuck to the reeds below. They saw big monkeys jumping about with their hideous reddish cheeks and hiding themselves in wide-spreading vines. They saw spiritual adepts clad with vests of the tawny clouds that shrouded them and being hit with mandara flowers thrown by celestial ladies. The uninhabited foothills of the mountains were like the solitary walks of Buddhist wanderers, and the streams at its foot were flowing, as if they were running to meet the sea, covered under yellow vests of kunda and mandara flowers of the spring season. Trees decorated with wreaths of flowers and shaken by the breeze seemed like bacchanal giddy with the honey of flower, rolling their dizzy eyes formed of fluttering bees. They walked about here and there and looked and admired the grandeur of the mountain, until at last they descended on the nether earth decorated with its cities and human dwellings. In a moment they arrived at the bank of the Samanga, flowing with the loosened flowers of all kinds, as if it were a bed of flowers itself. Brigu saw his son on one of its banks, his body changed to another form, and his features quite altered by his former state. His limbs were stiff, and his senses to stand still as he sat with a mind fixed on steady meditation. He seemed to have been there a long time, to rest from the turmoil of the world. He thought upon the course of the currents of the world that continually flow with successive joy and sorrow to man, who gets rid of them after his long trial. He became motionless as a wheel after its long-winded motion. He found his rest after his prolonged whirling in the whirlpool of the ocean of the world. He sat retired like a lover reclined solely on the thought of his beloved object. His mind was at rest after its long wandering. He sat in a state of uniform meditation, without a shadow of division or differentiation, smiling with a cold apathy at all the pursuits of mankind. Liberated from all concerns, released from the enjoyment of life, and free from the snare of desire and fancies, he rested in the supreme bliss of the soul. His soul was at rest in the everlasting rest of God, just as pure crystals catches the color of the gem that is next to it. Brigu saw his son in the calmly composed and awakened state of mind, freed alike from his thoughts of what was desirable and from his hatred and what was disgusting. Yama, seeing the son of Brigu, said to the father in a voice hoarse as a sounding sea, "Lo, there your son. Awake," he said to Brigu, who startled him from his meditation just like the roaring of a cloud rouses a slumbering peacock from his summer sleep. Upon opening and lifting up his eyes, Shukra saw the god standing with his father on one side, both so pleased at the sight that their face glowed like the discs of the sun and the moon. Shukra rose from a seat of kadama leaves and made his obeisance to them, appeared to have come to him like the gods Hari and Hara in a disguise of a couple of Brahmins. After their mutual salutation, Yama and Brigu sat on a slab of stone and appeared like the venerable gods Vishnu and Shiva seated on the pinnacle of Meru. The Brahmin boy, having ended chanting his mantras on the bank Samanga, approached them with a voice as sweet as nectarine juice of ambrosia. "My lords, I am emancipated at your sight this day. You have blessed me by your sight, resembling those of the sun and moon appearing together. The darkness that reigned in my mind, which no light of scripture or spiritual or temporal knowledge or even my austerities could remove, is dispelled today by the light of your presence. A kind look of great gives as much joy to the mind as draughts of pure ambrosia satisfy the heart. Tell me, who are you, whose feet have sanctified this place like the glorious orbs of the day and night enlighten the sky? Being addressed in this manner, Brigu desired that Shukra remember his prior birth, which he could well do by his enlightened understanding. Brigu acquainted him with the state of his former birth, and he remembered it instantly by the clairvoyance of his inward sight. He was struck with wonder at the memory of his former state. He smiled with a joyful face and glad heart to think on what he had been. Then Shukra said as follows, Blessed is Allah, the Supreme Being, that is without beginning or end, and is known here below his destiny, and by whose power the world revolves like a two-wheeled carriage. I see my countless and unknown birth from first to last, and the innumerable accidents to which they were subject, for an entire kalpa duration of the world. I have undergone great hardships and known prosperity also with the toil of earning. In different lives I have wandered, and I remember having roamed for a long time over the mountainous regions of Meru. I drank water reddened with the pollen of Mandara flowers, and wandered along the banks of the heavenly Mandakini, the Milky Way, filled with lotuses. I wandered about Mandara groves filled with flowering vines like gold. I wandered under the shade of the kalpa trees of Mount Meru, and in the flowery plains above and about it. There is nothing of good and evil that I have not tasted or felt or done myself. There is nothing that I have not seen or felt or known in my past lives. Now I know the knowable, and I have seen the imperishable one, in whom I have my repose. Now I have rested after my toils were over, and I have passed beyond the domain of error and darkness. Now rise, O Father, and let us go see that body lying on Mandara mountain, which is now dried like a withered plant. I have no desire to remain in this place or go anywhere of my own will. It is only to see the works of fate that we wander all about. I will follow you with my firm belief in the one adored deity of the learned. Let that be the desirable object of my mind, and I will act exactly in conformity with my belief. Chapter 15. Shukra laments his original body, behaving in the physical body. Vasistha said, Thus contemplating on the course of nature, these lovers of learning, Brigu, Shukra, and Yama, moved with their spiritual bodies from the bank of the Samanga. They descended into the sky and passed through the small opening in the cloud to the region of the spiritual masters, from where they descended to the lower world and arrived at the valley of Mandara. There on a cliff of that mountain, Shukra saw the dried body of his former birth lying covered under dark and dewy leaves of trees. He said, Here is that shriveled body, O Father, which you had nourished with many a dainty food. There is that body of mine that my wet nurse had so fondly anointed with camphor, aromatic agarwood, and sandal paste. This body of mine was used to repose on cooling beds made with heaps of Mandara flowers in the airy spots of Meru. This body of mine used to be so fondly caressed by heavenly ladies of time past. Now it is lying on the bare ground below to be bitten by creeping insects and worms. This body of mine that was accustomed to ramble in the garden plots of sandalwood now lies like a dried skeleton on a naked place. My body now lies impassive of feeling of delight in the company of heavenly nymphs, and withers away unconscious of the action and passion of its mind. Ah, my pitiable body, how you rest here in peace, forgetful of your former delight in the different stages of life, and unconscious of the thoughts of your past enjoyment and amusement. O my body that has become a dead corpse dried by sunbeams, you have become so hideous in your skeleton frame as to frighten me. I take fright to look upon this body, in which I had taken so much pleasure before, now reduced to a skeleton. I see ants creeping over the breast of mine, which was formerly adorned with necklaces studded with starry gems. Look at the remains of my body, now only a load of dry bones, but whose appearance of molten gold had attracted the hearts of beautiful women. Behold the stags of the forest flying with fear at the sight of the wide-open jaws and withered skin of my carcass, with which its horrid mouth frightens the timid fawns in the wood. I see the cavity of the withered corpse belly is filled with sunshine, like the mind of man enlightened by knowledge. My dried body, lying flat on a mountain stone, resembles the mind of a wise, abashed at the sense of its own unworthiness. It seems to be emaciating itself like an ascetic sitting in a trance on the mountain, dead to the perception of color, sound, touch, and taste, and free from all its desire and passion. It is freed from the demon of the mind and is resting in joy, without any apprehension of the vicissitudes of faith and fortune, of fear and fall. The joy that attends the body upon calming the demon mind is not to be had from possessions of any vast dominion of the world. See how happily this body is sleeping in this forest, free from all its doubt and desire in the world, liberated from the network of its fancies. The restlessness of the apish mind disturbs the troubles of the body and is hurled down by its excitation, like a tall tree uprooted from its bottom. This body, free from the impulses of the mischievous mind, is sleeping in its highest and perfect joy, and is quite released from the jarring turmoil of the world, clashing like the mingled roaring of lions and elephants fighting each other. Every desire is a fever in the bosom, and the group of our airs is like the mist of autumn. Mankind has no release from these except by the dispassion of their minds. Those who have had the high-mindedness to lay hold of the tranquility of their minds have gone beyond the bounds of worldly enjoyment. It is by my good fortune that I came to find this body of mine resting in these woods without its troublesome mind, and freed from all its tribulation and feverish anxieties. Rama said, Venerable sage, who is versed in all knowledge, you have already described Shukra's passing through many births in different shapes and feelings, all their causalities of good and evil. Why did he have so much regret for his body begotten by Bhrigu, in disregard of all his other bodies and the pains and pleasures which attended upon them? Vasistha answered, Rama, the other bodies of Shukra were merely the creation of his imagination, but that of Bhargava, the son of Bhrigu, was the actual one, produced by the merit of his earlier act. This was the first body with which he was born by the will of his Maker, being first formed in the form of subtle air, then changed in the shape of wind. This wind entered into the heart of Bhrigu in a flux for the vital and circulating breath, and being joined in time with the semen, formed the germ of Shukra's body. The person Shukra received the Brahman sacrament and became his father's associate, until at last it was reduced to the form of a skeleton in course of a long time. It was because this was the first body that Shukra obtained from Brahma, the Creator, that he lamented so much for it. Though dispassionate and devoid of desire as Shukra was, yet he sorrowed for his body according to the nature of all being born of flesh. This is the way of all flesh, whether it be the body of a wise or unwise man. This is the usual custom of the world, whether the person was mighty or not. Those acquainted with the course of nature, and those who are ignorant of it, like brutes and beasts, are equally subject to the course of the world, bound in the net of fate and liable to grief and sorrow. The wise and the unwise are on an equal footing with respect to their nature and custom. Only the difference in desire distinguishes one from the other. The lack of desire, or the bondage to desire, is the cause of the liberation or bondage in this world. Lack of desire is the great aim that distinguishes the great from the mean-mindedness of the base. As long as there is a body, there is the feeling of pleasure and pain in pain, but the mind that is unattached to and unaffected by them makes itself show wisdom. Even great souls are seen to feel happy in pleasure, and become sorrowful in matters of pain, showing themselves as wise in their outward circumstance. The shadow of the sun is seen to shake on water, but not so the fixed sun itself. So the wise are moved in worldly matters, though they are firm in their faith in God. As the unmoved and fixed sun seems to move in his shadow on the wave, so the wise man who has rid himself of worldly concerns still behaves like the unwise in it. He is free who has the freedom of his mind, although his body is held in bondage. But he labors in bondage whose mind is enslaved by error, though he is free in his body. Feelings of the mind cause happiness, misery, liberty, and bondage, just like the flames of fire cause light. Therefore, conform yourself with the custom of the society in your outward conduct, but remain indifferent to all worldly concerns in your inner mind. Remain true to yourself by giving up your concerns in the world, but continue to discharge all your duties in this world by the acts of your body. Take care of the inner sorrows, bodily diseases, and the dangerous whirlpools and pitfalls in the course of your life. Do not fall into the black hole of selfishness, which gives the soul its greatest anguish. Mind, O lotus-eyed Rama, that you mix with nothing and let anything mix with you. Be of a purely enlightened nature and rest content in your inner soul. Think in yourself the pure and holy spirit of Brahma, the universal soul and maker of all, the tranquil and uncreated all, and be happy forever. If you can rescue yourself from the great gloom of the individual ego and arrive at the state of pure indifference to all objects, you will certainly become great in your mind and soul and be the object of universal veneration. Chapter 16. Shukra's original body is brought back to life. Vasistha continued. The god Yama interrupted Shukra's long lamentation and addressed him in words that sounded as deep as the roaring of a cloud. Yama said, Now, O Shukra, Cast off your body of the devotee of the Samanga river, and enter this dead body in the manner of a prince entering his palace. You shall perform austere penance with this your firstborn body, and by virtue of that you shall become the teacher of the Datya race of giants. Then at the end of the great kalpa you shall have to leave your mortal body forever, as one casts off a faded flower. Having attained the state of living liberation by merit of your prior acts, you shall continue as the teacher of the leader of the great Asura demons forever. Farewell. We shall now depart to our desired dwellings. Know for certain that there is nothing desirable to the mind that it cannot accomplish. Vasistha speaking. Saying so, the god vanished from before the weeping father and son, moving in the burning sky like the dispenser of light, the sun. After the god had gone and gained his destined state among the gods, the two Brigus remained to contemplate on the inexplicable and unalterable course of destiny. Shukra entered his withered corpse, as spring enters into a faded plant, in order to adorn it again with its spring bloom and its springing blossoms. His Brahmin body immediately fell down on the ground, staggering as when a tree falls down with its uprooted trunk, and immediately became disfigured in its face and limb. The old sage Brigu, seeing the dead body of his son come back to life, sanctified it with propitiatory mantras and sprinkling of water from a sacred water pot. The veins and arteries and all the cells and cavities of the dead body were again supplied with their circulating blood, just like dry riverbeds are filled with floods in rainy weather. The body filled with blood made the limbs bloom like the growth of lotuses in rainy lakes and the bursting of new shoots and buds in spring plants. Shukra then rose up from the ground, breathing the breath of life, like a cloud ascending to the sky by force of the wind. He bowed down to his father, standing in his holy figure before him, like a rising cloud clings and kisses the foot of a lofty mountain. Then the father embraced the revived body of his son, and shed a flood of affectionate tears upon him, like a high-risen cloud washes a mountain-top with showers. Brigu looked the affection on the newly risen old body of his son, and smiled to see the resuscitation of the body that he had begotten. He was pleased to know him as the son born of himself, and to find his features impressed upon him. Thus son and father graced each other by their company, as the sun and Lotus Lake rejoiced to see one another after the shade of night. They rejoiced at their reunion like a loving pair of swans at the end of the night of separation, and like a joyous couple of peacocks at the approach of rainy clouds. The worthy father and son sat a while to pause after all their works and troubles were at end, and then they rose up to discharge the duties that were at hand. They set fire to the body of Samanga River Brahman and reduced it to ashes, for who is there among earth-born mortals who should ignore the customary usage of this country? Afterwards the two devotees, Brigu and Shukra, continued to dwell in that forest, like the two luminaries of the sky, the sun and moon. They both continued as living liberated guides of men by their knowledge of all that was to be known, and by preserving the equanimity of their minds and the steadiness of their dispositions amidst all the change of time and place. In course of time Shukra became the teacher of the demons, and Brigu remained in his patriarchal rank and authority among the sons of men. Thus the sons of Brigu, who were first born of Shukra, gradually was led away from his holy state by his thought of the heavenly nymph, and subjected to various states of life to which he was prone. Chapter 17. The difference between Shukra's daydreams and ordinary daydreams. Rama said, "Tell me, sage, why do others' daydreams not have the same result as that of Brigu's son?" Vasistha replied, "The reason is Shukra's body had first issued from the will of Brahma. He was born of the pure family of Brigu without being corrupted by any other birth. The purity of mind which follows upon decreasing desires is called its coolness, and the same is known as the stainless state of the soul. Whatever the man of a pure and contrite spirit thinks in his mind, the same comes to take place immediately, like the turning of seawater turns into an eddy. As the errors of various wanderings occurred to the mind of Shukra, so it was with everybody, as Brigu's son is an example. As the serum contained in the seed develops itself into shoots and leaves, so the mind evolves in all the forms that are contained therein. Whatever forms of things are seen to exist in the world, they are all false appearances, as they are all disappearances also. Nothing appears or disappears to anyone in this world, only air and fantasies in the air that show themselves to those bewitched by this magic scene of the world. Our notions of this part of the world present their forms to our view, and the appearance of thousands of such worlds in the mind is mere idea, as false as the show of a magic lantern. As the sights in our dreams and the images of our imagination are never apart from our minds, as they cannot show themselves to be seen by others, such is our false conception of the world. So all places and things are only imaginary ideas. They show themselves as real objects only to the blind sight of the ignorant. Ghosts, demons, and devils are also only imaginary figures of the mind, born in the shallow brain of men to terrify themselves with their hideous shapes. Thus have we all become like the dreaming son of Brigu, understanding the false creations of our imagination as sober realities. So the creation of the world and all created things are pictured in the mind of Brahma, and make their repeated appearances before him as the phantoms of a fantastic mental fabrication. All things that appear to us are as false as these phantoms. They proceed from the mind of Brahma, just like the varieties of trees and shrubs are produced from the same sap of spring season. Considered from a philosophical viewpoint, it will be found that the will or desire of each person produces the objects of his desire. Everybody sees everything in the world according to the nature of the thoughts in his mind, then he dies with his wrong view of it. In its idea, anything appears to exist which in reality is non-existent, though it is apparent to sight. The existence of the world is like a lengthened dream. The visible world is a widespread snare of the mind, like chains at the feet of an elephant. The reality of the world depends upon the reality of mind, which causes the world to appear as real. The loss of the one destroys them both because neither can exist without the other. The pure mind has the true notion of things and reflects the true image of everything, as a gem polished from its impurity receives a perfect reflection of everything. The mind is purified by its habit of fixed attention to one particular object. It is the mind undisturbed by desires that receives the true light and reflections of things. As the gilding of gold or any brilliant color cannot stand on base metal or on a piece of dirty cloth, so it is impossible for the weakened mind to apply itself intensely to any one particular object. Rama asked, "Sage, how did the mind of Shukra receive the reflection of the shadowy world and its temporary movement? How did these fluctuations arise and remain in his mind?" Vasistha said, "Shukra was impressed with the thoughts of the world from his father's lectures. These impressions remained in his mind like the future peacock resides in the egg. The world is naturally situated in the embryo of the mind of every species of living being. The world gradually evolves from the mind like shoots, sprouts, leaves, and flowers from a seed. Everybody sees in his mind what his heart desires to possess, as it is in the case of our prolonged dream. Know it this way, O Rama, that a partial view of the world arises in each person's mind in the same manner as it appears in the mind in a dream at night." Rama said, "But tell me, sage, whether the thought and the things thought of simultaneously meet in the mind of the thinker, or is it only the mind that thinks of an object which it never meets?" Vasistha replied, "The soiled mind cannot easily unite with the object of its thought, just as a dirty and cold piece of iron cannot join with a pure red-hot one, unless it is heated and purified from its impurity. The pure mind and its pure thoughts are readily united with one another as pure water mixes together in one body of the same kind, which muddied water cannot do. Lack of desire constitutes the purity of mind, which is readily united with immaterial things of the same nature like itself. The purity of the mind leads to its enlightenment, and these being united in one leads it to the Supreme." Chapter 18. Incarnation of the Living Spirit. Vasistha continued, "Living souls, Jivatman, residing in the seeds of material bodies in all parts of the world, differ from one another according to the difference in their knowledge of themselves. As long as there is no willingness or unwillingness connected with the identity of the living soul, it reposes in a state of rest, not unlike that of sound sleep. But living souls addicted to their wishes identify with those wishes and find themselves born here below in their desired shape. The subtle particles of the living soul and its inclinations run in one channel to the reservoir of life and are thickened into one living being by their combinations. Some are situated apart from one another and dissolve separately. Some are joined together and are born like two gunja fruit growing together. The universe consists of thousands of orbs like gunja fruit and contain the combination of atoms on atoms and those unconnected with one another. The totality forms the great garden of God, Brahman. These particles of the living soul and its inclinations being joined with one another become dense and thick and remain in the same place where it has grown. As ideas in the mind fall away, the mind changes and a different succession of birth follow to suit these changes. Thus every regeneration of the mind in a new life is accompanied by its particular desires and their results. The new life is attended with its proper body unless the mind has been cleared of these thoughts. As pure spirit in the form of vital breath, prana, performs the function of the body, so the mind, being reborn in a new body, is employed in all the functions of that body. The souls of all living beings are subject to 3 states of waking, dreaming, and sound sleep. These states are caused by the mind and not by the body. The soul, in its state as an individual person, does not give rise to the body and passes under the triple conditions, like seawater gives rise to the waves. The living soul that has attained its intellectual state beyond the condition of sound sleep, susupti, is awakened to the knowledge of itself and is released from its rebirth, while the ignorant soul is subject to be born again. Though knowing and unknowing souls attain the state of deep sleep and resemble each other in kind, yet the unknowing deep sleep soul that is not awakened to the knowledge of its spirituality is doomed to be reborn in the mortal world. Omnipresent consciousness makes it pass into the mind of its next birth and exhibit itself in different forms in all its succeeding and subordinate regenerations. These repeated birth and regenerations are as endless as the many layers in the trunk of a plantain tree. The spirit of Brahma is adjacent to and pervades the whole, like the lofty leaves of the same tree. The influence of the divine spirit is as cool as the cooling shade of a plantain tree. It is of its own nature, and it is as unchangeable as the core of the plantain tree, in spite of the changes in all its outer coats and covering. There is no difference or diversity in the nature of Brahma the Creator in his repeated and manifold creations of worlds. He, being the seed of the world, shoots forth by his moisture into the form of the expanded tree of the world and becomes the same seed again. So Brahman, taking the form of the mind, becomes the same Brahma by the memories of his mind, just as the sap of the soil makes the seed bring forth fruit which reproduces the same seed. So the productive seed proceeding from Brahma displays itself in the form of the world. But as nobody can say what is the cause of the sap in the seed, so no one can tell why the Spirit of God teems with productive seed of Brahma in it. So no one should inquire into the cause of Brahma, because his nature is inscrutable and indefinable. It is improper to say he is this or the other. One must not attribute causality to what is not the cause, or impute causation of material bodies to the immaterial Spirit of God that is prime and supreme cause of all. We must reason rightly regarding what is certain truth and not argue falsely about what transcends our knowledge. The seed casts off its seedy form and assumes the shape of the fruit, but Brahman, the seed of all, contains the fruit of the universe in his bosom without laying aside the seed. The seed of the fruit bears a material form, but Brahman, the universal seed, has no form at all. Therefore it is important to compare the visible seed with the invisible Brahman, who is beyond all comparison. Brahman evolves himself in his creation and does not produce the world like fruit from seed. Therefore know the world is the empty heart of Brahman and is neither born nor unborn of itself. The viewer viewing the view is unable to see his inner self, because his consciousness, engrossed by external objects, is disabled from looking into itself. Of what use is wisdom to one whose mind labors under the air of water in a mirage? What power has a mirage over a mind that possesses wisdom? As one who sees a clear sky does not see every part of it, and as the eye that looks on all others does not see itself, so we see everything about ourselves outside. As one who sees a clear sky does not see what is above the sky, so we see ourselves and others as material beings, but we cannot see the inner part of the immaterial soul as wise men do. Brahma, who is as clear as the sky, cannot be perceived despite all our efforts, because the sight of the sky as a visible thing cannot be compared to the invisible Brahman. Such a sight cannot present itself to us unless we can see the true form of God. But the sight of subtlest things is far from being visible to the beholder. We see only the outward sight because we cannot see the beholder of the sight. The beholder, God, is the only being in existence, and all that can be seen is nothing. God, permeate in everything that is visible, cannot be seen as a personal God or anything visible as a distinct thing, because whatever the Almighty King proposes to do, he instantly forms their notions and becomes the same himself. As the sweet saccharine juice of the sugar cane thickens itself into the form of sugar candy, so the will of God becomes compact in the solid body of the universe. As the moisture of the ground in spring becomes incorporated into plant life, bringing forth flowers and fruit, so the energy of divine consciousness turns itself into the living spirit which soon appears in a physical form. Everything we see cannot be separated from our idea of it in our mind, so the inner notion shows itself in the shape of the visible object, like a vision in a dream, which is only a representation of thoughts entertained in our minds. The ideas of self and others are like granules in the mind, like grains of salt produced in salty ground from the earth moisture. So the multitudes of thoughts in the mind are exactly like the grains of salt on the seashore. As the serum of earth appears in various shapes, so the sap of consciousness produces an infinity of ideas and thoughts growing like trees in the wilderness of the mind. These trees again shoot forth in branches and leaves, of which there is no end. So every other world is like a forest supplying its sap to innumerable plants, like thoughts in the mind. Consciousness perceives in itself the existence of everything as distinctly as the inherent power of the living soul exhibits itself in creation. Everyone's intellect, by virtue of its former act and their memories impressed upon the mind, perceives the existence of the world in the same manner as his living soul happens to meet with everything as present before it. There are some living souls who meet and join with others and propagate their species, then cease to exist after having lived a long time together. You must observe with keen sight and a well-discerning mind in order to look into the different states and thoughts of others. There are thousands of worlds contained in the mind like atoms in earth, the ample space of the sky and in water. Worlds reside in those atoms like oil and mustard seeds. When the mind becomes perfect, it comes to be a living being. Consciousness, being purified, becomes all-pervasive. Hence consciousness becomes one with the living spirit. The individual selves from the lotus-born Brahma and all other living beings are only their own self-deception. The senses of the existence of the world is like a protracted dream rising and setting in the mind. Some beings pass through successive states of existence, like a man passing from one dream to another, and they think they are firmly established in them, just as one supposes to be settled in some house appearing in a dream. Whatever consciousness dwells upon at any time or place, it immediately sees the same appearing before it, just like anything seen in a dream appears to be true to the dreamer at the time. The atom of consciousness contains the particles of all our notions, just like the seed contains the powdering particles of future leaves, branches, flowers, and fruit. I consider the atoms of consciousness in the mind contained within the particle of the material body to be both empty and joined in one, without causing a duality in their nature. Consciousness conceives many other atomic germs within itself under the influence of particular times, places, actions, and circumstances that cannot be extraneous from itself. It is this particle of consciousness that displays creation like the vision of a dream before it. It is this conception that led the gods Brahma and others to the idea of their visible bodies, as it makes little insects think of their own bodies. All that is displayed in this outer world is in reality nothing at all. Yet these living beings, though possessing the particles of consciousness in them, falsely conceive the duality of an extraneous existence. Some intellects of particular persons display themselves in their bodies and derive pleasure from their consciousness through their eyes and external organs. Others look on outer objects as receptacles of consciousness from the belief that the all-pervasive, inseparable, and imperishable intellect soul must abide in each and every one of them. Some men view the entire physical world within the body instead of the all-pervading consciousness of Brahma as Vishwarupa, the universal form. This being hardened by long habit of thinking, so are plunged in the gulf of error. They wander from one error to another like a man sees one dream after another. They roll about in the pit of their delusion, like a stone hurled down from a hill. Some persons rely on the union of the body and soul. Others who rely on the soul alone are placed beyond the reach of error. Many who rely only on their consciousness shine as rational beings. They who think in terms of other people's errors are to be considered as under the influence of false dreams in their sleep. God, being the all-pervading spirit of nature, is truly seen in the spirit of everyone. Because he is everywhere, his omnipresence is present in everything in all places. God, shining as everyone's living soul, resides as the soul of each soul and mind, whether directly or indirectly created. One living being is born in another, and that again within another, like the layered bark of plantain trees that grow one under the other over the innermost core. By changing from thinking about phenomena to recognizing their essence in the invisible fullness, we get rid of our error of the reality of the world of form, as we do of the ornament in the material gold. He who does not inquire into the question, who am I and what is this world, is not liberated in his inner soul and suffers under the continuous fever of a false life. He is successful in his inquiry, who by his good understanding comes to know how to curb his worldly greed day by day. As proper routine is the best medicine to secure the body's health, so the habit of keeping the organs of sense under control is the only way to improve understanding. He who rambles with his words and does not discern with his mind is like a blazing fire in a picture. No one can be wise until he gets rid of a false wit. As the perception of air comes by feeling and not by word of the mouth, so wisdom proceeds from the curtailing of desire. Ambrosia in a painting is no ambrosial food, fire in a picture is not burning flame. A beauty in a drawing is no beautiful mind, and wisdom in words is only a lack of wisdom. At first wisdom serves to weaken our passion and enmity, then to uproot them at once, and at last it lessens our desire and endeavors and gives the appearance of holiness to its possessor. Chapter 19. Differences between waking and dreaming states. Vasistha continued, Brahma is the seat of life and remains as empty air everywhere. Hence there are many kinds of living beings situated in the world within the womb of universal life. All living beings composed of dense consciousness and soul contain other living animals underneath, like the manifold layers of the plantain tree, and insects contained in the womb of earth. Worms and insects that grow out of the dirt and scum of earth and water in the hot season, and appear filthy to our sight, nevertheless are living beings full of particles of consciousness. However, living beings strive for their progress, so they prosper in their lives according to the different scopes of their thoughts and actions. Those who worship gods go to the region of gods. Those who worship Yaksha, nature spirits, meet in the world of Yakshas. Those who adore Brahma ascend to the world of Brahma, Brahmaloka. Therefore resort to what is the best and greatest refuge. Shukra, the son of Bhrigu, obtained his liberation at last by the purity of his conscience, even though he was enslaved of his own nature to phenomena at the first sight of them, the Apsara fairy. A child born on earth first has purity of its soul. Then it becomes of the same nature as the education he gets, and not otherwise. Rama said, Please, sage, tell me the difference between the states of waking and dreaming. What are the states of waking watchfulness, waking dream, and waking delusion? Vasistha said, The waking state is that in which we have a sure reliance. Dreaming is the state in which we place no certain reliance and we believe it to be untrue. Dream is something that seems like the waking state, but lasts only for a moment. If an object is seen over a length of time and distance, it is said to be a waking dream or dreaming wakefulness. The state of waking dream can be of longer or shorter duration, during which what we see appears the same at all places and times. Dreaming, as long as it lasts, is also like waking, but waking seems like a dream when the objects of its vision are not lasting. A dream that is understood as an occurrence of the waking state is believed to be waking, but the inner consciousness of dreaming makes it a dream. As long as one knows anything to be lasting before him, he believes himself to be waking, but no sooner is it lost to him than he thinks himself to have been dreaming it. Now hear how it is. There is a principle of life in the body that causes it to live. This vital element is an electric force called life, Jiva Chaitana. When the body is active with the power of the mind, speech, and other members of action, its vital element is put into motion by the vital breath that it breathes. This breath circulating throughout the body gives it the powers of sense and consciousness, which have their seats in the heart and mind, where the false conception of the world is hidden. The mind circulates upon the outer world through the passage of sight and other organs, and sees within itself the form of many changing shapes and figures. As long as these forms remain permanent in the mind, it is called the waking state. So far have I told you about the cause of waking. Now hear me expound on the laws of sleep and dreaming. When the body is weary with action of its limbs, mind, or speech, the living element becomes still and remains at rest with the calm and quiet soul residing within the body. The internal actions of the body and mind become quieted, and the motion of the heart being at rest, the living principle becomes as still as a flame of a lamp unshaken by the wind. The vital power ceases to exert itself in the members of the body and ceases to keep conscious awake. The senses of sight and others do not act upon their organs, nor do they receive sensation from without. Life lies latent in the inner heart, like liquid oil residing in the sesame seed. It lies as dormant in the interior part of gold, within frost and fluidity and clarified butter. The particles of consciousness that has taken the form of life, after being purified by its earthly impurity, mixes with the internal soul and attains a state of sound sleep, as if lulled to unconsciousness by a cooling breeze. one who feels that his mind being incapable of passion, who deals unconcernedly with every one, and who has reached the fourth stage of consciousness beyond the three states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping, is said to be deadened in life, turiya. When the vital principle again comes to action after the enjoyment of its sound sleep, either in this or the other world, it takes the name of living elements or mind or self-consciousness. This principle of life, and though sees within itself the ebbs and flows of many worlds, just like a large tree in all its parts and productions are observed to be contained within the seed. When the breeze of the vital breath puts a slight motion to the element of life, it becomes conscious of its self-existence as I am. The motion being accelerated, life finds itself flying in the air. When the vital breath is immersed in the fluids or phlegm of the body, life gets a feeling of humidity in itself, as a flower perceives its own fragrance. When it is assailed by internal bile, then it has the feeling of its inner heat and sees all outward objects with its melancholy temperament. When it is full of blood, it perceives a fiery redness in itself like that of a red rock, or like the crimson red of the setting sun in the sky. Whatever one desires to have, he sees the same in himself in his sleep, and this is by the force of his inner vital breath acting upon his mind as it does upon his outward organ. When the organs are not besieged by external objects that disturb the inner sense of the mind indulges itself, reflecting upon many things. This is called its dreaming state. But when the organs are besieged by outward objects, and the mind is moved by motion of vital breath, vayu, to their sight and perception, it is called a state of waking. Now, O great-minded Rama, you have learned the inner process of your mind, but there is no reality in it, or in this existent world, which is subject to the evils of death, desire, and destruction. Chapter 20. The mind is the person, not the body. Vasistha said, Now, Rama, I have told you all this in order to explain the nature of the mind to you, and for no other reason. Whatever the mind often thinks upon with a strong conviction of its reality, it immediately assumes that form, like an iron ball igniting from constant contact with fire. Therefore, the convictions of being or not being, and of receiving or rejecting a thing depend upon the imagination of the mind. They are neither true nor untrue, but merely fluctuations of the mind. The mind is the cause of error, and it is the mind which is the framer of the world. The mind also stretches itself in the form of the universe in its gross state. The mind is called the person, the ruler of the body, which being brought under control and directed in the right course, produces all prosperity. If the body were the person, how could the high-minded Shukra pass into various forms in his very many transmigrations? Therefore the mind, Chitta, is the ruler of the body, Purusha, which is rendered conscious, Chetya, by it. Whatever form the mind assumes to itself, it undoubtedly becomes the same. So inquire into what is great, devoid of attributes and error, and which is easily attainable by everyone. Be diligent in your inquiry, and you will surely succeed to obtain it. Hence, whatever is seated in the mind, the same comes to pass in the body, but what is done by the body never affects the mind. Therefore, O fortunate Rama, apply your mind to truth and shun whatever is untrue.